Hi, my name is Benedict for HiHertz. In this video, we're looking at the new UAD Capital Mastering Compressor. It's another clone. I like the unit, so before anyone says I'm being a hater or being negative or anything, I'm going to ask the questions, because the question of, is it good quality, that's just a given. Anything digital is good quality. You get out what you put in. So the questions really are the far more pertinent and practical ones that we need to look at is, does it do something special? Does it deliver something we don't already have access to? And can it therefore justify its price? And of course, learning curve. Not that learning curve's a big deal in this case, but price it does turn out to be one. You'll want a quick listen, so mix, turn in the compressor. No, not level matched, not worry that it doesn't level match. And then turn in the saturator. Before, after. Rock and roll. So it does do a good job. If you know what you're doing with it, it does a good job. If you don't know what you're doing with it, nothing is going to do a good job, because compression and mastering is not a thing that can be done with presets. Nothing in music can be done in presets. You can't press a button on your guitar that says Eddie Van Halen and you suddenly become Eddie Van Halen. You press the next button and become ZZ Top. It doesn't work that way. I know there are people who think it does, but it doesn't. Yes, thank you. It's a clone, but it turns out it's a little bit of a clone of a clone. And it has a relative as well. This looks like it belongs in the 50s, and the name CM5511 kind of indicates that this is the case, but it's not. The donor device, the hardware, of which there were 4 only in the world, and it's possible there are only 2 remaining in reading between the lines. Maybe it just reads wrong, but I kind of get the impression that maybe only 2 of these are existing after really only 10 or so years. But I guess 10 years is a fair period of time for a piece of componentry to run, especially Valve. It was designed as a throwback device in 2011, and they built, as I said, 4 of them for Capitol Records as a mastering compressor, and general use in their studio, to recapture like Fairchilds and similar that they had back in the day. And in many ways it does that really rather well. But it's a new unit, cloning a relatively new unit, despite the fact that there is this overwhelming obsession with 1955. So again, it's that question I always ask, particularly with UAD, but all of these manufacturers doing this, should we care about the history? Should we care about 1955 somehow being attached to our tools today? Does it make them any better? I'm always kind of the no variety, understanding what was done in 1955 and why it was so amazing. You know, Sam Cooke or whatever he was put through this compressor, I really don't know, it's irrelevant. Listen to Sam Cooke as an example of, let's say, 1955. Wow, amazing. Just truly amazing. Would he have been as amazing without this unit or its equivalent? Yes. Would he have been as amazing if we used stock devices in Reaper? Yes. Did this make him more amazing than he would have been otherwise? No. So I'm not sure that we should care about the history. UAD themselves, I've looked at them several times, but just looking at this, the rich sound of a legendary hand-built, okay, 2011, is 2011 legendary? Again, I'm picking on this because I think we are distracting ourselves or drawing us off, and that there's an awful lot of marketing. I'm going to let you work that out with some ABs that I do later. Historic catalogues. Okay, this wasn't there for Sam Cooke or whoever was being recorded in 1955. They may have put it on new material. They mentioned Sabbath and Selena Gomez, who is, well, at least by my take, not exactly legendary. Sam Cooke is legendary. Selena Gomez is not. Lady Gaga is not legendary. But then I'm older. I did not grow up with her being the only kook on radio. I grew up with Del Bozio from Missing Persons, Terry Nunn from Berlin. Not that Terry was particularly out there, but she was a girl kicking it for herself. Pat Benatar, oddities like Klaus Nomi, I never remember her name, the crazy operatic woman, and then of course Kate Bush. So I don't find things from 2011 that legendary. It seems like hype. Now you can get the same professional finishing touch previously only available at Capitol Studios. Gives the impression that we can only get an amazing result with this thing. Now, looking at price, we see that it's not cheap. At half price, it's €191. Let's call a 1-for-1 for US dollars. But at full price, $392 US dollars. That's going to be somewhere around 500 Australian dollars. That is a serious amount of coin. I can buy a whole new door and have change for that, probably. But it's around the same price as the whole of Reason or the whole of Bitweek, give or take. We're getting ourselves into that arena for one box that doesn't do as much as it could, or perhaps should. So we're going to ask that question, is this so compelling that we're going to throw our money at it, or that we should throw our money at it? Or is it exaggeration and puffery in action? There is a relative of this. As soon as I started using it, I felt like I know this feel. And only took me a couple of seconds to work it out. Magic Death Eye. I'll pop a picture up. The Magic Death Eye is actually designed by a Capitol mastering engineer as well. Whether he was involved with this, I do not know. But it's designed by a Capitol mastering engineer and has a very similar sort of feel overall. The real notable thing is what's called the ballistics. So when we're running, see how that meter moves? And as it moves, it changes the sound, it changes the feel, the groove of the piece. And there's a certain feel that you get in the Magic Death Eye. It has a wonderful ballistic when you get it right, but all compressors have a terrible ballistic when you get it wrong, and when you get this right, it has a very similar sort of sense of ballistic. So I went and had a look, because I was pretty like, ooh, over the Magic Death Eye, but I did not get it. When it came out, it was $150 US. It now seems to be $99. And it's really similar. So one of the questions is, if that's $100 to provide that ballistics, and it provides the lovely saturation sound as well, how is 400 in round numbers comparable? I am not convinced that it ever really is, but we're not going to compare the Magic Death Eye. We're going to be a lot more mean and compare it with stock and cheap/free VSTs. Let's first do an A-B. We're going to turn this off to try to take away the visuals. We're going to compare in a few rounds. We're going to listen to this piece with no processing. Now mastered. Naturally, a lot louder. That is the nature of mastering to a fair extent, to take a mix and make the most of it. So I have no problems with the A-B being louder. What we have is this, the entirely free Q range. The Q range is also doing the EQ duties in the original, which you'll see, but it's actually a different curve. I didn't think to copy and paste them. I just worked the way I normally do. Get this, do the EQ to make it seem nice, and then because this has no finalization, then I'm using exactly the same M-class stock Reason maximizer, so limiter and soft clipper, to make sure that we don't explode. So in terms of A-B, it is still fair. Obviously, before, after, it sounds good. So we've got no argument there. Let's move to some different material. Much softer material. One of my own pieces. But this was originally always designed to be a little heavy-handed compared to where I felt it should be. It comes up nicely. You can see the volume gain, but again, no problems with that. Exactly the same tool set. So in terms of AB, does it compress nicely? Does it make a mix sound good? Most definitely yes. So if you don't like my seeming to be like about other things, I think with no competitor, it's a very good tool. But we don't live in a world without competitors. So this moves us to part 2 of the ABs, which is the question of, is it better? Bearing in mind that we can get Magic Death Eye for $99, or we've already got tools in our DAW. And I assume you're using a reasonable quality DAW, not one of the sort of $49 ones which don't always have particularly good devices in them, but assuming you're using Reason or Reaper, even though their tools are ugly, they are just fine for the task. Even Cakewalk, even though I'm not a big fan of it, their tools are good quality. What's there, if you use the right ones, they are good quality. Even the old Sanitas ones are very good quality. Any of those sorts of things, anything like that, you've got tools which are good quality. So let's compare this Capital Mastering, Benedict Mastering. Definitely Benedict Mastering. Now, I'm hearing little to no difference. It's inevitable there might be some difference, even if only because even though these tools are exactly the same, the EQ curve here was not actually the same, but we wouldn't expect the sound to be 100% the same. If it was, well, what would be the point of spending $1 in it? So I expect it's going to change the sonic profile some, but oddly enough, there is no real difference. Sure, we could put them on some sort of AB-inator and say, oh, look, there's a tiny difference here. But if we were listening to the radio and heard this song, and then we were listening to the radio 10 minutes later and we heard this song with the other version, would we think it sounded any different? Not at all. Let's move to the other one. UAD Capital. Benedict. Now these masters predate this VST entirely. They're things that were already existing, which is part of why I grabbed them. They weren't masters done with the, oh, well, how can I get this to compete with them, or fail, or lose, or whatever. They're existing things. This record that Silence in the Shadows is coming from is in the can. Actually, no, it's published. So even better. That's why I chose the published one. I was thinking of something that was in the can. No, this was done months ago. So this is completely published, and this is the published version that you're hearing right now. And then remastering with this. And again, while there are some differences, mostly in how hard it's pushed, because I found that and this I'm going to put down to user error, I found that I couldn't quite push as hard as I had here, and then I remember part of the aim of that record was that everything was to be pushed a little too hard from my point of view because it was about other people. I can't seem to push quite as hard in the UAD. It feels like it starts to drive a little. But I'm going to put that down to Benedict, and also to the fact that if we start pushing things into tubes, it's only a matter of time before they start to snap, crackle, and splat. But again, surprisingly same. Let's put it in a real-world situation. Apart from the pop, there's no difference. Let's go to this guy. Stereo. Unfortunately, I'm not hearing any difference. Now, what this is competing with here is, yes, it's taking the role of several devices. Essentially, it's ended up replacing the tape unit, the G-Sonic analog tape unit, which I have reviewed. I'll pop the doohickey up there. Even though this doesn't have WoW and Flutter, it's because it's not in the chain, it's therefore replacing it. It's replacing, obviously, the M-class compressor, which is doing glue compression, similar to what we're doing here, and soft tube saturation knob. So you can say, yes, there's an efficiency in one box doing the role of 3, or you could say that that was a liability because we have less finesse, and the other devices after are the same, as I've said. But this is going up against, for its, say, $400, is going up against one device that costs $30-40 or whatever. I admit that I got the Q-Range tape machine for comp for its review, but nonetheless it's sort of a $40 device, give or take. Sorry if I've got the numbers wrong, but it's not expensive. It's a tenth of the cost of this. And otherwise, stock tools in Reason, and some freebies like the Q-Range. And we are well and truly holding our own against this $400 device. I got to say, I'm in two minds about that. In one side, I'm disappointed that this is the outcome, because I would hope that I get something which is like, oh, okay, I feel humbled by this. Because when I first played with the Magic Death-Eye, I did feel a little humbled by it, and I learned some things from playing with its demo. But I'm also a little bit like, because supposedly this is so much better than everything else, and, well, I'm holding my own with it with stock and free and peanut-priced objects. So answering the question, is it better? Is it worth the big outlay? Well, ultimately that has to be up to you, but if it were my coin, I'd be like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't see it. All right, at this point, we will do my good and bad. What's good? It does sound great. And again, if anybody wants to try and get into me about, you're just being negative, no, I'm not. It sounds great. Straight away, I thought, oh, this is kind of similar to the Magic Death-Eye, which I think is great. So it really does sound wonderful. But does it sound unique? No, because straight away I can pick Magic Death-Eye, and then once we put it into battle, it doesn't actually sound unique. It does have that nice ballistic feel. When you get it into the right position for your song, then it has that nice ballistic feel, which, as such, I don't necessarily feel the same way coming out of the M-Class, the stock in Reason. But once we get to the point where it matters, like having it on AM radio, I'm not sure that I feel it there, one way or another. But it does have a nice ballistic feel, which is uncommon in a lot of compressors. That is a good thing. And this last one is both good and bad. It has limited options. When we get into the walkthrough, we will see that all of the knobs are stepped, as in you can't get anywhere between the position 3 and the position 4. In a positive, that makes it easier to A-B. So we can say, is it better here or is it better here? Which is easier than, is it better like 2 microns of a parsec between there and there? It's too fine for us to really necessarily be able to tell the difference. So in some ways it can make it easier to say, I've got these limited options, of these limited options, which is the better one. So in a plus, that's good. As a negative, then it just seems like, well, if this was significantly the better way of doing it, wouldn't all plugins do this? Oddly enough, no, they don't. Now, it may be just because they are technically obsessed and want to have 11 trillion options, so they can say, you've got 11 trillion options on their website. But I'm used to infinite knobbage, so not having infinite knobbage sometimes can seem a little annoying, especially if I go, look, 3 is not enough, 4 is too much. Can I have a 3.5 or a 3.25? So I would be saying, seeing this as software, why can we not have a button? Either a button per knob or a button overall, that says these now become infinite, within their range, obviously. Or if that's going to upset your skeuomorphism enough, just put another button on here and give us a second GUI, which is, oh, you heathen bastard, use this version. In which case, suddenly everything becomes infinite and, it becomes more even, more self-explanatory, more normal for modern standards. It's definitely doable. Waves have done it. I know one of their compressors did it. You could A/B. I think a few of their devices ended up doing it because they made their new GUIs and people didn't want to lose the old one, so they gave us an A/B, and it changed the way, not the plugin sounded, but how we interfaced with it a little bit. So it's a doable thing. For the price, I feel like it's a negative that they didn't do it. So I think their stepped knobs become a liability in that we don't have enough choices. It's bad. Well, yes, as I'm talking about here, we're stuck with its ancient look. The ancientness of the look does not make this device sound, work, feel any better to the listener. A person just putting on their AM radio as they're riding their tricycle down to the shop to buy today's potato, they're not going to feel any better about our mix because of the GUI. I'm sorry if that offends, but it is a lot of marketing in that GUI. Yes, it looks super cool, but it's silly. The setup of it is slightly odd. Now, that is because they've gone with the old-fashioned thing. A lot of the knobs operate backwards. Not unusual, but it just is. It's not a hard learning curve at all compared to some other devices that I've used. The learning curve here is pretty easy. That is a positive. I think that it is a good device and it was nice to use. But its setup is unnecessarily odd. And because of its price, I have to raise the fact that there is no final thing. You see here I'm having to use a finalizer, so a limiter and a brick wall clipper, a way to stop my overage from going over. And this will just go over. It'll blow straight through. And as such, is perfectly okay. But at $400, give or take, why could they not, seeing they have extended functionality, because this is extended functionality, give us another little thing of extended functionality, and maybe even a button to turn it off if we're so offended by its lack of purity, but another thing that manages this stuff. So whether that be a limiter, because they do have limiter circuitry in here, you may have noticed this clipping a little bit, like flicking its light on. So limiter, clipper, and a final, and then this meter would finally be useful. It gives us LUFS readings, but LUFS readings are totally 999% useless anywhere but the absolute final outcome of what people are hearing on their AM radio when they're tricycling down to the market to buy today's potato. Putting it somewhere before that, well, it's really very silly. I was going to say something slightly crude about male cows, but that's what it is. So at this price, the lack of ability to turn this into more of a one-step tool strikes me as just silly and a massive omission. So the lack of any kind of master clipping, brick wall type situation is to me just fail for the price. Alrighty, so that's the goods and bads. Now we'll walk through the device. Again, always remember that on its own, if it wasn't in a world with competitors, whether Magic Death Eye or What's Come in Reason, then I would be like, this is a lovely device, and it is. But we are in a world where there are competitors that are a quarter of the price, or for a similar price to this one doohickey that doesn't do everything, you can buy a whole damn door. Here is our device. We shall settle everything. You can reset every feature with a control click. So we'll make sure that everything's back where it belongs. Turn the saturation off. Click, 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 click. And off on. Something is not quite the same, because you look at the in-out here, they're not tracking exactly the same as each other. Why that is, I'm not sure. It's not showing delay compensation as such, so it's not just time, as in flicking a little bit later or whatever, although they should still be the same. But there's a slight difference. But if this is made with tubes, then we wouldn't expect it to sound the same. If it's changing levels, it's a little bit of a furphy. But again, I'm not super bothered, because when you get to the point of mastering, you're not looking to achieve the same level you had before. You don't want that person tricycling around with their AM radio to be hearing your mix at minus 12 dB. You want them to be hearing it at Metallica levels. Well, maybe not Metallica levels, but you get my point. We've got two ways to turn it on and off. One here, which is a switch, and this one which, no matter how many times you click it, it doesn't actually move. It just strikes me as stupid. You've got to drag it. Okay, you can be like, oh, but that's how the flick switch works. That's like you have to do this. But really, come on, grow up. So it's easier to use this one. There are presets, but as I say, I'm not going to touch on them because I don't think anybody should ever open them. They are wrong, 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 wrong. It's not how things are done. An A/B system, copy and paste. Why we'd be using that, I don't know, but it's there. It's in their technology, so no argument with it being there. Over here, we can reduce its size or make it even bigger. And then access the written manual. I didn't look at the video. I did RTFM in this case because some things were a little obtuse and some things I just wanted to understand what they were doing. If this was better annotated on the front, I probably would not have done any RTFM. Also, no tooltips. Therefore, I would not have RTFM'd if there were tooltips. But what's there is okay. Fine, that's your basics. So what happens? We turn this on, we bring the channel in. We then have to work out how it works. We've got our input, so we can change. Again, notice how they jump. I think it's 2 or 2.5 dB or whatever, RTFM on that one. We've got side change. Now, it's not an external side chain. It's not listening to something somewhere else. It just means that we are, as this suggests, moving a high pass. So with it, it's off. It's at 300 and something hertz, and it's 700 and something hertz there. Again, not annotated. Why is it not annotated? But I guess it makes it look cool. But you can build the argument quite reasonably to say, well, at what point does it help my process? This is not changing what the listener hears. It's merely altering what the sidechain is hearing, like what makes the compression decisions. It's changing what that hears. So if you're finding that your compression is reacting too much to the low end, then you can switch this from off to on to really pretty crazy high, and it should change what happens. Interestingly, it seemed to actually increase the amount of compression when I go to... That's not explained in the RTFM. That's what I really want in a manual, to explain this. Why would I use this? How is this going to change? And when I go to 700 hertz, I seem to get more compression. I don't understand. But nonetheless, you can change the drive, and the threshold is actually one of these things that's backwards, and it goes from 0 to 11. It's good that it goes to 11 because, if you suddenly find yourself working for Spinal Tap and you don't have a knob that goes to 11, they're just going to think you're stupid. So this is the point at which compression starts. It doesn't have a thing that tells you kind of this is the levels this thing wants to hear. No doubt everyone at Capitol Records had some little thing blue tacked to their wall saying make sure that your mix, before it's hitting any kind of stuff, make sure that your mix is around this sort of level. This doesn't give us any kind of guide, nor did I note it in the RTFM. Obviously, they understand that some mixes come in soft, some come in hot, but it's a little bit like, okay, it sure doesn't allow us to be brutal. Not that we should be brutal at this point. It is a situation that's designed that we should be kind of light. But in terms of setting up, that can feel a bit, because your input really changes the level. So you're just going to go, sounds better. Is it better? I don't know. But nonetheless, you have the ability there to set your threshold, then your attack and release. There is a way to do that without messing up your threshold. Now, it's down here at headroom. Let's say 16 dB. Unusual, but we'll assume that that's sensible. You can change that, making where the threshold works better or more suited to your material without changing the input, which is probably a better thing. So rather than pushing more in, I can set this, okay, I'm kind of getting the reactions that I want here, and then use my threshold. We've got our attack and release. Now this is set by default to slow and fast, which is kind of the opposite of what most people think these days, but it makes perfect sense, bearing in mind this is a glue, or what I call a groove compressor. This is not meant to be about hacking levels off. If you've got stupid spiky levels, go back, fix your mix. If your snare drum is delivering like plus 47 dB every time it goes smack, then go back to your snare or your drum bus or your rhythm bus, preferably your drum or drum bus, and at least put a clipper across it. Everything should be good. If you listen to the before here, this is a fully managed mix. So we're not looking for this compression to actually be changing our levels per se. We're looking to make things groove. So a slower attack with a faster release allows things to come through, and then we want to groove them. So we want to find the point at which this does groove. So let's go a little heavy-handed. Commonly, I normally work fast to slow. What I'm listening and hoping to find is the point at which the transients within the groove come through. Not the transients, that stupid snare that's far too loud, but the groove. I want to find the transients in the groove, like the beginning of the groove to come through, then we want to squash it afterwards. So you see I kind of rock backwards and forwards. Forwards is where the beginning of the bah comes in, and this is where we start to deal with the second half of it, the whoop half of it. Now hopefully, maybe this is it. Let's do it this way. Hopefully you can hear, and I don't feel like I'm getting exactly where I want it to be, but I'm really just like, boom, bam, boom, bam. I want that kind of feel. We are being brutal at this moment because I want to be able to hear it. So we'll pull this back a little bit, and pull this back a little bit. Here, how without particularly adding any level, we've added a feeling of impact This does that nicely when you find the right setting. It can feel a little bit sort of like, that's not exactly where I want it, which is part of what makes me feel like, yeah, give me that button where I can get a little bit more precise. But nonetheless, when we A-B and we get our approach right, which is more using this than this, then we will find a point where it does this. And that's what we want this to do. There is this ratio knob, which didn't exist on the original, why it's sort of shoehorned in, and just like the Magic Death Eye, is using a screw rather than a knob. The numbers for this I wrote down because I had to RTFM to find them. As a ratio is of 2, which didn't exist on the original unit. 3, some of the units were 3, some of the units apparently were 4 to 1, 6 to 1, and then 10 to 1. 10 to 1 is a bit heavy-handed for a mastering situation, but if you're struggling to find that point where your groove is, see how that helps you do that. I've gone with the 4 because that's what they default to, and reasonable after in this situation because we're only looking for small movements in the squishification. You hear it sounds very squished when we get to even 2 or 3 dB down. We're just looking for groove. And the bow, 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 bow does move better with this in. That is really good. That I'm pleased with. Having to sort of work here and here is a thing you get used to, but if this is relevant to this, put it here. Again, GUI just annoys me. But nonetheless, and the same with the ratio. Not only is there no tooltip, but they don't, it's like, yeah, you wanted to make it look old-fashioned so that we're all impressed with it, but its usability is diminished as a result. A shame. You'll see this is obviously giving the same results over here. That's cool. Oh, and again, I just don't understand what that's doing despite having read the manual because we get a different result over here in our compression. Yeah, that just becomes so much more. Maybe it's a bug and this is actually backwards. Actually, I reckon this might be backwards. That would be funny. They default to 700. Okay, I can see the logic of this in a sense, but it's backwards to what you think it's going to be. You think, okay, that's going to be the lowest possible option, which is off. That's going to be the middle option. That's going to be the high option because it follows the left to right of our standard spectrum display. But this goes backwards. So that's part of why I'm sort of thinking this doesn't dig in as much as I think it should. That's digging in a lot harder now because I've been running it at... That's not down to the functionality of the unit inside. That's just down to the idiot who made the GUI. I am sorry, but that's just stupid. And even RTFMing didn't actually help me to understand that. Maybe if I read RTFM'd a lot more carefully, but honestly, these days, just fail. Control Link, as I think I said before, well, whether I did or didn't, allows you to actually put different options in different channels. We are not going to do that simply because, well, you just generally don't have much use for it. We'll discuss use case later, but for this kind of work, you want them to be the same as each other, in which case when you come in, you only need to understand this bit and the relevant bit here, because that is, well, largely irrelevant. Wouldn't bother me if it wasn't there. Okay, next things. Well, we've got our meters. They're self-evident. You've got various things. You can put this into a mid-side mode, which means that we can have different settings. Which is mid, which is side, I really don't know. And I am not going to get into because I don't care for mid-side. I personally find it silly. So I'm going to keep it in left-right mode. No need to write and tell me that I'm silly because I don't dig mid-side and you do. We all have our choice as to what matters to us. I am far more of a traditionalist, but not about GUIs. We can change what our meter is reading. We can read our input. We can read our attenuation. There is no up or down. Because of the way it's labelled, you kind of get the impression maybe it's a 4-way. But no, it's not. It's just you look at the input, and that'll be VU, as they tell us, not peaks. And then all compressors are really only useful in the backwards. But if you are asking yourself the question, am I feeding this the right level? Although, that only seems to read pre this, in which case I don't know what the point of it is, unless of course you are using an input knob before that, and if that's relevant or necessary, why don't you give me one? For $400, I think you could put a knob in here. I know it's not that hard. Sorry to be mean, but I just find this really silly. You can also run this in sidechain linked or dual mono. Sidechain linked is just stereo. Dual mono means that, especially if we unlink them, then it just is going to react to the material differently. Generally, you're going to want them in linked, but if you have either a mix that is unbalanced, like the classic Beatles split mix, at that point you might well consider a dual mono compressor, or I keep my mixes so the stereo is nice and even if it's wide or whatever, it's nice and even more often than not. And it's not uncommon for me to actually use sometimes a dual mono because it just changes the stereo slightly. So it gives you a little bit of a type of widening, which is far better and far more natural than those god-awful stereo widening knobs that just splay and spray everything everywhere. So I'm pleased that it's there. It seems to have defaulted to dual mono in this case, but it should be on sidechain link, meaning stereo. Could have put stereo there, I think. But dual mono just means that if you've got material that's different on each side, you could be causing your mix to do this, which, as I said, could be a necessary thing if you've got a Beatles-style recording with very split, or if you just want to take advantage of that to have very, very minor moves in your stereo, which gives this sense of sparkle into the stereo, which is way, way better and way saner than those silly stereo mungers. So that's all our top. And then our bottom. They give us this extra stuff. A-B mixing, 100%. Okay, why you'd be using it, I don't know, but it's there. This one turns out to be, in my mind, vital. Rather than changing the input here, change the way the sidechain hears differently. And that way we can A-B fairly. It took me a while to work that out because I'm thinking, I should do it here. And while the drive to increase the level makes perfect sense, it's harder to A-B. So they've solved that problem. You can monoify the lower half of your mix, anywhere from doing nothing all the way up to 200 hertz gets collapsed. Exactly how? They don't draw pictures, they don't give us any help on what it's doing or how it's doing it. But I don't put a ton of stereo in my bottom end anyway, so it shouldn't need doing. If you are one of those people who's obsessed with doing stereo subs, like, stereo widened sub basses, and then wondering why your master is struggling, especially in the real world, then you might find that you want to be doing this, which will help just keep the stereo on the top half of it and narrow it down to make things sit better. There's an overall gain, so we can change what's coming out. Oh, we didn't actually cover that here, sorry, my bad. We can change the output. So if we haven't got the level that we want, then we can now push. And this does have half positions. If you want to go hard, there is a limiter in here. It's not a brick wall limiter, but it will limit, it'll just still let your overs through, hence the need for this device here. But you can push and use that limiter. So there's nothing wrong with my master was actually up here. So getting that point where it just clips, it gives it a little bit of the advantages of a clip. Now I'm using another clip down here as well, but you do what you want to do to get the sound that you want, not by formula, hopefully. So now obviously when we A-B, we don't have the same levels, but you can change the whole gain of the plugin there should that become necessary. You've then got the saturator that you can dial in. And yeah, it's a nice saturator. It does add level. This is one where I wouldn't mind if this was actually level compensated, or even better, for the $400 that they gave us a little button that said, here, let us approximate it's not a killer, but it would be nicer if we didn't just have this immediate, like, sounds better because it's louder thing going on. Because what's going to happen is people are just going to turn to 100. And if they've set their levels and then they're not watching them, you just see that it goes and adds a whole pile of bulk. And that's good that it's adding bulk. The saturator is nice. Now, I also think that this is a 50 to 100%. Now, is that 50 to 100% mix? I think it is. I would rather it be a drive than a mix. But nonetheless, that's what it is. This is the point at which I then got a question, okay, is this gain pre-shape saturator? This says shape, which would suggest gain, or could it be post? I'm a little confused, and I don't know, it's a little unclear. If I've set up my levels exactly as I want them here, and then I'm adding extra level here, and there doesn't seem to be a way to manage gain post this, which is added gain. The sound is good. I do like the sound of it. It does bulk up, and it does add harmonics, brightness, but without being brittle. Everything about the sound is fine. Okay, I'm happy with my levels. They're sitting right where they should. That is all good. I never do this stuff in headphones. You get completely the wrong levels. And then we've got this meter. Okay, metering's quite nice. As you see, the metering here is, oddly enough, exactly the same as this. We can see our VU and we can see our peak. They give us a choice of seeing this in LUFS. Two different kinds of LUF readings. Go work out what they are. I don't care. I don't care for LUFs. Or in dB full scale. In other words, peak to peak. I'm a VU man, so it's giving us the results that we want. Cool. All works. Simple-ish unit to use. Again, I'm going to say the caveat, the common sense caveat being that the unit doesn't deliver the results. The unit gives you the ability to get results based upon what you do with it. If you know what you're doing, and once you understand how it works, particularly the connection between these two fellas, then it is a very nice sounding unit. But again, I just am always going to feel like, despite the niceness of the unit, for $100, if I wanted that unique ballistic feel, I could get Magic Death Eye, which is a quarter of the price. And without doing an A-B, I would say 100% of the quality. Or I can just keep doing what I'm doing in Reason, because it's, guess what, 100% of the quality, and I already own it. So that's my final words. All right, obviously a slight problem with the camera. So its conclusion. My name's Benedict for Higher Hertz. Remember, my job's to give my opinion, so please don't go giving your opinion as though mine doesn't have a right. I'm happy to have an open discussion, but an open discussion means that we present our points and our reasons for our points, which I believe I have done fairly well and fairly fairly here as well. So we will not tolerate meanness from people who just want to say you're an idiot, because you know what, if you do that, you are the idiot, and we will either simply delete your comment or roundly take to you and prove how stupid you are because you're being mean. The world does not need that kind of meanness. This is an interesting situation to be in, to really like the device and go, oh yeah, I'd consider putting that into my thing, but then hitting that brick wall. So my advice is, if you are interested by the device and it has plenty going for it, and the price is not an obstacle for you, then download the demo, spend some time, really A/B it against other similar sorts of things if you have said things, but more A/B it against existing things that you've done, existing masters, existing compressinating that you have done, preferably stuff that's already published, so you're not going back into, oh, well, I was doing this with that in mind. So, my masters here, in both cases, they didn't have Magic Death Eye in mind, they didn't have anything other than me just doing the do, and then putting them up against this to see how it fared. And again, I say, I was a little disappointed in a sense that this thing didn't bring something amazeballs, something different, something new. And also, just as I say, again, a little chuffed that it's like, I get the same result. Find out how it goes for you. And whatever you do, have a great day.